Rex planted his paws at the threshold and refused to move. He's never done that before. These are 3 true police stories that still haunt the officers who lived them, calls that began like any other night call and ended with images that never quite left the mind. Tonight you'll hear a K9 handler whose dog balked at an empty room, a rookie who brought a telephonic warrant into a storm and found something no one expected, and a patrol officer who followed a trail of blood into a basement and watched a figure vanish into the rain. All 3 took place behind ordinary doors on ordinary streets. All 3 left unanswered questions. I want to warn you up front. These accounts come from people who were there. I'll frame each story, then let the officer tell it in their own voice. If you like deep, first-person true crime that leans on the procedural detail without the theatrics, subscribe. More of these are coming. Story 1. The K9 Handler. I've been a K9 handler for almost 9 years. You learn to read dogs the way some people read faces. You know when they want to chase, when they're curious, when something smells like fear. Rex is a 4-year-old German shepherd, steady and blunt the way good dogs are. If he wants you to go left, you go left. If he wants you to clear the back seat, you clear the back seat. He's never frozen on me, never hesitated like that. That night it was late, just after midnight. Rain had started to come down in that steady, sound-dampening way that makes everything feel smaller. Lights from houses glossed over with wet. We were called for a foot pursuit. Neighbor saw 2 people arguing on a sidewalk. One ran when he shouted. Someone heard a scuffle. The complainant hung up before dispatch could get more. We rolled hot, 2 units and me with Rex. The street was one of those rows of plain houses, the kind people pass on the way to work and never think about again. The porch lights were off. A neighbor stood in the doorway of a duplex, her bathrobe clutched, telling the dispatcher what she'd seen while my partner checked the yard, and I set Rex on leash. We always sweep the first floor before taking anyone upstairs. It's routine, it's muscle memory, and it keeps you alive. The entry was straightforward. Front door unlocked, living room empty, ceiling fans stirring the smell of old cooking, phones on tables, a television with a dead screen. We moved in formation. Me, Rex at a harness, back up behind. He cleared the living room on a sit and smell, nosing under couches, nosing behind curtains. No hits. We worked the kitchen, then the hallway toward the stairs. Nothing about the house screamed danger until we hit the 2nd floor. There was a hallway, narrow, the carpet muted from years of footsteps. At the end, a bathroom door was open. The smell changed. It wasn't anything I could name, just this absence, like the room had been scrubbed and left to dry under a fan. Rex slowed. He froze between the top step and the hallway and let out a low growl, the kind that vibrates in your chest when you've heard it enough. I've heard it in training when he marks a hiding place. I'll admit I felt a twinge, a professional adrenaline that says, pay attention. I clicked my flashlight off to watch his eyes reflect in the beam. He stared straight down the hall, and then, after that small growl, he barked. Single, sharp bark, then another. He barked not at a scent on the floor, but at something at the far end of the hall, past the bathroom. There was a shadow there, a darker rectangle against the dim wall, like someone had dragged a curtain and left it hanging. My backup moved toward the bathroom to check the tub, the linen closet. I tightened my grip and told Rex to heel. He planted his front paws and leaned his shoulder into my hand, the particular weight of a dog that refuses. Rex, come on, I said, half joking, half testing. He was a dog of commands. He obediently sat when asked. This time he did not obey. He looked at me, then toward the dark, then at me again. His tail was low. He barked once more, not in the frantic way a dog barks when it wants to play, but in the way of an alarm. We moved forward anyway. It's what you do. You don't let your dogs make life or death decisions for you. I gave the hand signal to clear. Backup pushed the bathroom door open. It was just a bathroom. Sink, mirror, towel rack, nothing behind the shower curtain, no trapdoor I could see. We checked the closet, we checked laundry baskets. There was nowhere for a person to hide and no sign anyone had been there for hours. We cleared the 2nd bedroom at the end of the hall. Empty. The bed was made, curtains closed, no footprints on the carpet besides the marks the rain had already left. I had my light on full, routine checks, checking the baseboard, the closet, flipping mattresses. Nothing. The house looked lived in. Nothing immediately suspicious, except Rex. He would not go into that bedroom. He sat on the threshold and stared like there was a person on the other side of the air. My partner and I argued quietly about whether we should call for extra backup, about whether it was possible someone slipped out a back door. We radioed dispatch to run plates to ping the area. The neighbor said she'd heard a thump like something heavy being dragged a little while before. Nothing showed on cams from nearby porches, no footprints in the wet grass of the backyard. Still, the dog refused to enter a room we'd checked twice. At some point I told myself dogs can pick up a scent I don't, that maybe someone had been there hours earlier and left a smell that hung. Maybe. But then there was the behavior. Rex had his hackles up. He wouldn't move. He paced at the doorway rather than sniffing the floor. It was like someone invisible stood in the middle of the room, and he could see them. We forced the issue more than once. We would coax him forward, give the command he knows by heart, the one he responds to in training. He would take one step, then plant again. His eyes tracked that darker patch of wall at the end of the hall like he expected movement. I am not one for superstition on duty. You make call-outs and call for what you need and you write reports. But for a moment, and it felt like a long moment, my mouth went dry. Your instincts on the job are honed for identifying danger and eliminating it. This my gut didn't like. After we left, we did a thorough search of the exterior. No signs of forced exit, no damaged screens, no footprints. The homeowner had an explanation that he'd been asleep, that he must have had the TV on earlier. Nothing line up. We canvassed the block and found nothing unusual. Neighbors had their own habits, their own nighttime comings and goings, that meant most of what we could have blamed on someone was easily dismissed. We left the scene cleared for now, flagged for follow-up. Rex refused to go in that room for the rest of the shift. He wouldn't even step past the threshold when the owner came over to move a box. He sat and watched the doorway for minutes afterward. Later that week we ran our checks again, visited the house during the daytime, walked through with plain clothes, checked every wall, every attic access I could find, every floorboard for a trap. There was nothing. Rex behaved completely normal the second day. He trotted in like he owned the place and sniffed the bed and ignored the shadow. But the handler remembers the night with the rain and the way the dog looked. He remembers the way the beam of your flashlight catches on a strip of carpet, and your mind wants to fill the rest in. We put it down to training and sensory things. Dogs react to temperature shifts, to drafts, to scents humans can't perceive. Maybe someone had been hidden and left through a window that eased open and closed again. Maybe a neighbor's propane leak made the air movement weird. Maybe it was nothing. But every time I walked past the house later on patrol, something in my shoulders tensed just a touch. Rex would watch that hallway and flick his ears. He never barked at that empty corridor again, but he never crossed the threshold as if he could see what I could not. I still carry that image. Rain on the windows, my flashlight beam falling across an empty bed, and the dog sitting, shaking only a little in the cold, refusing to go where I told him. What do you call that? A trained animal's instinct, catching something your eyes miss or something else. We logged the call, we wrote our observations, we moved on to other nights. The case had an open item for suspicious activity, nothing more. The handler says it still plays in his head sometimes, that tall dark rectangle at the end of the hall, like someone tall and thin had been standing with their back to the wall, and Rex, steady Rex, who simply would not go. That was one night. The shift rolled on. The rain kept falling. What we thought of as normal patrol work had become, for a moment, something else. Next, a storm, a 911 hang-up, and a telephonic warrant that led to a basement no one expected. Story 2. The telephonic warrant and the rescue. I remember the weather first. Wind that sounded like it was trying to push the houses down. Rain coming down so hard, the radio in the cruiser turned into a vague hiss, the way old vinyl presses do when the needles get wet. I was a rookie then, on my third-month solo nights, the kind of rookie who notices everything because everything was still new. The dispatcher patched the call to me, an automated 911 hang-up, cell phone location only approximate. Sometimes it's a kid who got their pocket dial on the porch. Sometimes it's squirrels on a line. But the dispatcher told us something else when I asked. The voice on the line sounded like a child. Clear as that. I pulled up outside a house that looked worse for wear. porch light flickering, mail stuffed in a box, overgrown shrubs that made the steps feel hidden. The homeowner answered the door with the kind of smile that has been practiced for when strangers come knocking. He kept his shirt half untucked like he'd hurried to the door. He seemed a little too eager to chat. It's one of those things you get on the job, the too eager homeowner who talks to anchor the space, who wants to be the first thing you hear. Inside was dimmer than outside. The power had cut out on that block. Rain pattered against the windows like fingers. I remember the toys first. A house full of them, not scattered but arranged in a way that felt off. Dolls lined on chairs, little shoes placed with care, a giant doll sitting upright in the corner like a sentinel. Things that suggest children live there. But then there were other things. A stack of clothing in a heap that included adult garments, a row of small backpacks hung like trophies, a smell I can't describe that made my throat close up if I let myself think on it. I called dispatch and ran a name query on the homeowner as I walked inside. He answered, evasive about who lived with him. That's always a red flag. The call history came through on my tablet while I stood there listening to the rain. The number had been an outgoing call that connected and dropped. When I asked the homeowner, he said he hadn't called 911. The way he said it made me uneasy. He kept glancing at the basement door in the hallway, like a person peeking toward a place he shouldn't have to worry about. Somewhere in the back of my head, a bell rang. Take the time to get it right. We had a reason to check. The legal question was whether exigent circumstances allowed entry. The dispatcher worked with us. We put together a telephonic warrant over the phone, the prosecutor's office on call, the duty judge able to hear the elements by phone. In storm conditions, when a child's voice might be recorded or there's a chance someone's life is in immediate danger, telephonic warrants are a tool we're allowed to use. The paperwork follows later. The priority is getting someone safe. By the time backup arrived, the lights in the house shuddered and went out entirely. Flashlight beams cut across walls. My partner had his high-powered light on and swept it across the room. The homeowner kept following us, trying to steer us away from certain spaces with small talk. Oh, the basement's messy, he'd say. We're renovating. Or, that old thing. We've been trying to get that out for months. People do that sometimes. Minimize what's down there as a way to keep prying eyes away. We checked the first floor. The living room, the kitchen, a hallway with the big doll staring from the top of the stairs. There were girls' clothes folded in a stack on a chair. The pattern of it made me uneasy. Toys, but no visible child. The kind of staging that could have been ordinary parenting or something deliberately arranged. We asked the homeowner where the child was. He said the child had been at a neighbor's earlier. His voice had a syntactical looseness, a cadence like someone trying to sound normal. We got the okay from the prosecutor, took the telephonic warrant number, and then went for the basement door. I'll tell you the best way I can. Pictures shrink what you felt that night. There's a certain dampness when you descend into a basement in a storm. The air turns cooler and heavier. Your flashlight reflects off the concrete in a way that's almost like looking into a shallow grave. The stairwell creaked. The smell came up right away. Stale, metallic, but underneath, like old medicine and laundry that had been wet for too long. My partner and I traded glances. We texted dispatch our location and that we were clearing the basement. The first step down, the beam of the light hits a mass of things. Clothing draped over boxes, a child's shoe wedged under a shelf. Some of the toys were grotesquely oversized, as if someone had replaced normal-sized dolls with things meant for display. There were hand drawings taped to a column with childish scrawls, but the lines were more agitated than most children's drawings. We called out, "Police, anyone down here?" The standard phrase, polite but loud enough. Silence answered us, thick and complete. The homeowner, who had followed us all the way to the top of the stairs, kept talking about the weather as if words could keep normality in the room. "We used to have kids over all the time," he said, voice an odd mix of pride and insistence. I remember thinking about how his hands wouldn't stop moving a little, a nervous tick, a constant straightening of his shirt that never got any straighter. We followed the beam deeper. There was a mattress leaned up against a support column and a chair with toys around it. On the floor, near the boiler, we saw a phone face down, its screen dark, wires tangled under boxes. The thought came to me then, Maybe there was a child who used hands to hit the call function by mistake. Maybe the voice the dispatcher heard was a false positive, but dispatch stressed the voice was childlike and that the call had lasted long enough to be worrying. We kept moving. Then we heard it, a faint noise that made my spine go cold. Not crying, not exactly. It was a voice caught somewhere between whispering and a child trying to imitate an adult's tone. I can still hear the way it leaned against the walls in my memory. I signaled for quiet. The sound came again. This time it had words embedded in it, broken, like someone reciting something they'd been told to say. My training says you bring everything you have to bear. Control your breathing, stay methodical. Don't run unless you have to. But being a rookie means your body sometimes remembers the fear before your mind passes it. The homeowner tried to dissuade us again. There's nothing down there, he said, and that sentence had the same tone people use when they hope saying it out loud will make it true. My partner and I both looked at him. He took a step back, hands raised just a little, like a man caught in the act of words. We told him to stay put at the top of the stairs while we went down. He didn't protest. He followed anyway, claiming he wanted to show us something. In the hallway light, his face looked pale from the storm, his eyes avoiding ours in a way I'd seen from suspects later in my career. At the bottom of the stairs, the light caught a small handprint on a dusty box. It was faint, as if someone had pressed with the pads of their fingers and then pulled away quickly. Near it, a child's voice came from somewhere deeper, not a scream, not a call, but a muted, repeated phrase. It sounded like someone being told to say something and repeating it back. I radioed dispatch that I had a faint voice and that we were proceeding. We had the telephonic warrant information ready to submit, and the officer on duty at dispatch said they would relay to the prosecutor that we were proceeding under exigent circumstances to check for potential victims. Legally, that telephonic warrant covered our entry and search, and in weather like that there isn't time to wait for the judge to show up in person. Our priority was safety. We checked the boiler area, a storage nook behind a stack of boxes. The smell was stronger here, the air heavy with dust and old laundry. The light reflected off something small and shiny on the floor near a stack of crates. And then the voice changed. It was no longer muffled. It became a series of words that made no sense for someone doing normal play. There was an adult cadence forced into the cadence of a child, as if someone had practiced a phrase to be read by another. The homeowner suddenly stepped forward. His hands were shaking. He said, and then stopped. He looked at us with this odd, pleading look, like a man who knew he'd been caught, but still wanted an explanation that would absolve him. My partner grabbed the homeowner's arm and told him to sit on the step and to stay. The homeowner said something about a Siri call, that the phone had made a call accidentally when someone was trying to ask the phone to text a neighbor. It was a thin story, but it fitted the tech pattern. People use hands-free, kids learn to trigger assistance, and sometimes a phone will misinterpret. But the voice coming from deeper in the basement had a rhythm that wasn't quite Siri's mechanical register. It had this ragged undercurrent, like someone trying too hard. It was more deliberate than an accident. We followed the voice deeper, around a rusted water heater, under shelving crowded with things that had no business being kept. A pair of small pink sneakers lay by a stack of magazines. There was a pile of female clothing pressed into a corner, as if it were a pillow. The light hit marks on the wall, smudges maybe where people had been moved or dragged. My hands were steady because they had to be. My palms felt slick inside my gloves. The voice kept coming, now a staccato set of words, repeating the same syllable over and over like someone reciting a script. We paused at a door that led into a subroom, a space under the back of the house. The homeowner's jaw tightened. He positioned himself a little between us and the door, as if standing there would make it so nothing untoward could be behind it. That's a strange thing to watch in an adult when you're on a call where someone might be in danger. People step into roles without thinking. Mother, protector, defendant, whatever makes them feel like they have control. "On 3, my partner asked. He's a calm guy. We counted down in low voices. My flashlight was small and bright, the kind that eats darkness. I remember how the beam looked on that door, how the rain outside seemed louder when we were about to cross that threshold. The homeowner mumbled something about, "She calls for Mommy." his voice cracking in the same place. Maybe he wanted us to find nothing. Maybe he wanted us to find confirmation of what he'd been hiding. As we made ready to open the door, the voice inside changed pitch just for a second. It was not a child's pitch now. Not quite. It was a grown man's voice carrying a childlike tone, words forced into form. The sound made my throat close. I put my hand on the knob and turned, and then everything blurred for a second, the rain above, the lights, the smell, and the voice stopped. I won't go into everything we found below in this moment, not because I want to hide anything, but because some things need to be told in their right measure. All I will say now is that the house did not match the story the homeowner told at the door. There were signs of long-term habitation in that basement, in ways that didn't belong to a single night's neglect. There were items arranged in patterns that suggested someone had been kept and controlled in that space. At the top of the stairs, the homeowner's face was a pale oval in the flashlight glow. He insisted on going with us. We insisted he stayed. The process was messy. The prosecutor's approval over the phone, dispatch patching us through to get the warrant number, checking boxes we needed to check to stay on the right side of the law. We moved because the voice made it impossible not to. When we pushed the door open, a smell moved out like a living thing. It was old and sweet and rotten at the same time. The light landed on a cluttered little room, and in the middle of it, near a low table, someone stirred. That's where I stop for now. The memory of the way the voice cut off when the door opened is one thing that keeps me awake when it rains. There's more to tell. What we did in that room, who we found, the way a man's voice had been trained to sound like a child, and the aftermath that followed. But I want you to hold the image for a moment, descending into a basement in a storm with a telephonic warrant in your pocket, the homeowner watching, the voice that doesn't fit, because that build-up is part of why the rescue that came after felt like its own kind of nightmare. We'll pick up from that door and then move on to the third call, the one with the trail of blood and the basement window that opened into rain. But before that, take a breath. There are things in these rooms that won't untangle easily. End of part 1. My hand turned the knob, and the door fought back like it was holding its breath. The beam of my flashlight cut across a small room that smelled of damp fabric and something sweeter, older, that I couldn't name without tasting the memory of it. The light landed on a man curled on the floor near a low table, thin in a way that speaks of too many nights without enough food and too many months without sunlight. He was mid-40s by the look of his jaw and the way his hands were folded against his chest. At first he didn't move. He blinked when the light hit him. He looked up at us like a man waking from a bad dream, slow, as if his muscles remembered how to obey, but his mind was still deciding whether this was safer than the dark he'd been living in. Behind him, against a stack of boxes, there were signs of long-term habitation. A small cot, blankets that had been washed and dried and still held a scent of something else, a scattering of photographs taped to a wall, and items arranged as if someone had tried to make order out of a place meant to be invisible. When my partner called out, "Police, you're safe," the man's eyes flicked to the homeowner standing in the stairwell. For a second the homeowner spoke, something like, "It was a mistake." Then his shoulders shrank, as if the words themselves weren't enough to hold back what had been done. It was the homeowner's face that told us more than any admission could, pale, eyes fixed somewhere above our heads, lips moving to a justification he hadn't yet formed. The man on the floor answered in a voice that was not entirely the voice of the man he was. It was higher, thinner, and the cadence was wrong, like someone playing a part they'd been forced to rehearse. He said, "Thank you," in the way a child says it, clipped and careful, repeating syllables he had been taught would calm a room. When I knelt down and asked his name, he reached for a sleeve with hands that shook and told me plainly that he was a father. That line, "I have 3 kids," arrived with a weight that filled the basement in a new way. It made the tiles seem small and suddenly inadequate for the harm watched over them. We cleared the space quickly but deliberately. We secured the homeowner and removed him from the stairwell. The charges at arrest time were for unlawful restraint and other associated offenses. We read him his rights. It doesn't feel like much for someone who had been living in a concrete room, kept to a small footprint of safe space for what we would later learn had been months. We called EMS immediately. The man could stand, but each step took something out of him. Paramedics wrapped him in a blanket that smelled of antiseptic and rain and asked if he was hurt. He answered in that same odd voice, then, after a pause, reverted to a regular tone to say that his throat hurt when he used it the other way. What investigators later pieced together, from interviews, from the physical arrangement of the basement, from marks on the wall and items hidden in crevices, suggested that the homeowner had been exercising control over the man for an extended period. There were signs of coercion, routine, restricted movement, the systematic placement of clothing and toys to create an environment that pushed the captive to a specific behavior, in this case, to adopt a childlike manner of speaking when prompted. The officers who took statements said the voice had been deliberately trained by threats and reinforcement. The man had managed to use a mobile assistant, a voice command, once to call for help. That small, accidental help call is what saved him. Even writing that sentence is strange. A voice recognition function misused as a lifeline. The dispatcher who first took that audio clip told us later she had been struck by the way the voice sounded and by the fact that it connected long enough to be meaningful. It wasn't just a dropped signal. The phones and small appliances in that basement had been used as tools and as restraints. Items meant for children had been repurposed to create a tableau of normalcy that masked something else entirely. The man needed decontamination, food, and time. In the ambulance on the way to the hospital, he squeezed my hand briefly and, in his lower, real voice, asked what would happen to his kids. He could not tell us much about their whereabouts in an immediate way. They were not present with him, and protecting their identities became an instant priority. We brought Child Protective Services into the circle and asked outside agencies to handle outreach, because telling that story has consequences that ripple beyond the 2 rooms we had just cleared. I won't go into the intimate particulars of his injuries. The paramedics' report notes signs of physical abuse and neglect, but describes them clinically. Malnourished appearance, abrasions consistent with restraint, signs of long-term stress. There was no need for lurid detail to make the point. The man's face, the exhaustion in his eyes, said what words would only clumsily add. He later told an investigator that the homeowner had forced him into a routine of behaving childishly, of lowering his voice, of adopting a performance that would keep him from being noticed as an adult. It was a psychological control as much as a physical one. Trauma leaves marks in stories, not only scars. The homeowner was taken into custody. He denied criminal intent in a way familiar to people who've done interrogations, small admissions paired with a recasting of events as misunderstandings. We collected evidence in the basement, small items, notes, and electronic traces. We took photographs that would make prosecutors' jobs possible. The prosecutor's office put together an initial charging packet based on our observations and the victim's statement that night. That part of the story, the paperwork, the court dates, the interviews, is the continuing part that follows any rescue. Some of those processes don't move quickly. Victims need care. Evidence needs to be preserved. The legal gears are slow. What stays with me even months later is how ordinary the house was on the outside. The porch sagged, the mail piled up. Inside, the homeowner kept a smile ready. Outside, the thunder washed the street clean in sheets. The contrast between the banal world and the hidden room was so stark it left a bruise in my memory. We like to imagine monsters lurking in dark alleys, but sometimes what a neighborhood needs to hide is the very thing you pass on your evening run without thinking twice. We left that house with the rescued man under ambulance care and the homeowner cuffed. Follow-ups continued. Community resources stepped in for the children once their location was secure. The man later gave a fuller statement. He described how fear becomes a voice inside your head that starts small and then insists you use the same words it teaches you to survive. The way he said that, quietly, as if he had practiced saying it, is one of those phrases you can't unhear. And yet, even with the arrest and the evidence, there are afterpieces that never quite settle. How many nights had he been there? Was he the only one? How easily could someone else have slipped by in a neighborhood where doors are left unlocked and lights go out when storms blow through? We did our jobs the way we were taught. Document, preserve, get help where it's needed. The prosecutor's work took its course. The rescue was real. The man, returned to daylight, would spend months in treatment, counseling, and rebuilding small parts of a life that had been compressed into a cellar. But the image I can't seem to shed is the sound of his altered voice when we first found him, the way someone can be trained into sounding like something they are not because it was demanded of them. That dissonance is part of what makes that night haunt me. We cleaned up the papers, filed the warrant supplements, and the rain washed the street into something that looked as if nothing bad had ever happened on it. People were back to bringing out their garbage. Children played under porch lights a week later. Life refolds itself in curious ways. But inside me, and in the notes of the team, a story had settled that didn't quit. It was not neat. It left questions. And that's the way it often is with real calls. You close one door and there are always more. That night stayed with me because of the way modern technology, ordinary objects, and human cruelty had combined into something that needed law enforcement to untangle. It was rescue, yes, but it was also proof that the obvious smiles at the door can be the ones that hide the worst things. We drove off the scene in a kind of silence afterward, each of us thinking of our own family, of our own kids. The shift did not end the need to keep moving. There were more calls, more streets. But I remember the weight of that basement, like a physical thing sitting on my chest as I turned the cruiser onto the main road. We had saved a life. That fact is as tangible as the wetness on my uniform. The rest, the prosecutions, the recovery, the people's reminders that cruelty can be quiet and methodical, settled into reports and follow-ups. We had one more call that night, but it's another evening entirely, and it happened on a different street. A house with a cracked front door and a faint scream caught on a hung-up 911. The patrol officer who took that call still tells the story like someone replaying a nightmare. Story 3, The Missing Man and the Basement Escape. The call came in late, the kind that trains you to move at a certain gate. A 911 hang-up with a transferred line that had a passenger on the other end, and in the background, the sound of someone trying to muffle a scream. By the time the patrol car rolled up, the ambient neighborhood noise had folded itself into the rain again. The front door was cracked, just enough to let a draft and the light in. That small gap is where most of these calls begin to peel back the curtains on something more dangerous. The officer on that beat described the street as quiet, the way you describe a mouth before someone speaks, tense, expectant. He pushed the door gently and cleared the living room. No one there. The upstairs hallway had something that made him stop. A bathroom with a sink's water still running and a smear on the tile, dark enough that in the beam of a flashlight it was unmistakable. There was more than a spot. There was a trail that led from the bathroom toward the back of the house and toward the basement. The officer radioed dispatch, priority entry, possible injured person, and called for backup. One of the unnerving things about these calls is how common objects take on a sharper meaning. In this house, a child's toothbrush lay near a crumpled towel. A mirror had been cracked and taped up in a way that said someone had been trying to hide damage. The living room was arranged like a pause in people's lives. A couch, a remote in a certain place, a coffee mug cooled at the edge of the table. But the bathroom told a different story. Streaks, a heavier thud at the center of the pattern, and a dark arc down the stairs. On the banister, a smear of something was wiped clean, but left a shadow. The officer's hands were steady as always, but in his chest a particular cold started, that he only knows from the moment you realize this is no longer just a routine check. He went down to the basement alone, flashlight low, radio clipped to his shoulder. The steps were uneven and the beam picked up hanging insulation and a stack of old boxes. The air smelled metallic and sharp. Midway down, the officer found evidence of a struggle. A chair overturned near the bottom, a smashed lamp and a small trail that led around to a sub-room beneath the house. In the dim light he saw something that froze him. A chair, the kind used to restrain people temporarily, with zip ties cut and tossed on the floor nearby. There was a pool of blood the size that suggested someone had been hurt badly enough to force immediate medical attention. It pooled in a way that made the concrete glisten. He called out, and the house answered with its own silence. Then, a sudden human movement. A figure climbed through a narrow basement window that had been opened just enough for a person to squeeze out. The figure was quick, wet with rain, hair plastered to their head, and nullifying the beam that tried to hold them in place. They ran into the backyard and vanished into the rain. The officer sprinted after them, yelling for backup. The backyard fence turned into a tangle of gates and neighbors' hedges, and the rain made visibility worse. He chased across wet grass, boots slipping, breath burning. The figure was fast and knew the lay of the land better than anyone coming at the moment unplanned. By the time a perimeter was set and the K9 team arrived, the suspect was gone. The dog alerted to scent leaving the property, but lost it at a point where a storm drain met a culvert and the water drowned the track. Sometimes nature is an accomplice in erasing footprints. We ran the grid and knocked on doors. People saw someone moving, but none of the descriptions matched tightly enough to lead to an arrest that night. As they processed the basement, the officers found personal items that suggested the missing man was indeed tied to that house. Identification matched the homeowner's records. The homeowner himself was nowhere to be found. The chair with cut zip ties, the pool of blood. And the missing person created a constellation of evidence that screamed for answers, yet pointed at no single closure. The patrols broadened. A K9 team ran until the air felt thin. The dog alerted on the porch and then again by the side alley, but the trail frayed as the suspect had chosen a route where rainwater and pavement would shred scent. The officers catalogued everything: a shoe left on a stoop, a piece of shredded fabric snagged on a fence, signs that someone had fled. They interviewed neighbors who'd heard muffled sounds earlier, someone who thought they heard a car leave in a hurry, someone who had seen a light moving across hedges like a headlamp. Nothing gave the decisive connection. The missing man's belongings were found stamped with household markers that tied him to the address. A wallet with his name, a set of keys, a photograph pinned to the basement wall. Yet no sign of the homeowner suggested he had stayed. It was as if the house had exhaled and let something leave in the night. Investigators later classified this as a possible homicide or assault with a fleeing suspect. The suspect's identity remained unknown that night and for weeks after. The case file grew thicker with interviews, with forensic reports, with surveillance footage pulled from nearby businesses that showed a wet figure crossing a street at 2:13 a.m., but not enough to make a positive ID. We tried canvassing far and wide. We ran license plate checks on cars that left the area around the time the figure was seen. We followed leads to motels and transient campsites that turned out to be red herrings. The missing man was never found that night. The trace we could follow stopped in rain and mud, and the way nature and desperation worked together to obscure movement. Months later, the house was sold and a normal family moved in. They put up curtains, painted the hallway a lighter beige, planted flowers in the front yard, the ordinary gestures that pretend nothing dark has ever happened within a home's walls. To neighbors, life had folded back into shape. But for those who had been there that night, the images stuck. The chair with cut zip ties, the small dark pool on the concrete, the way the light of a flashlight catches on rain as a person disappears into it. The case remained open. The missing man's file sat on a desk that saw other files added to its neighbors. Sometimes officers drive past that house on their shifts and think about how a home can change with people coming and going, and none of them knowing the full story. The officer who chased the figure remembers the sound of the rain and how the radio felt like a thin thing between the world and something else. He remembers the smell, the cold, and the way his boots slipped on clay as he pursued a phantom. He also remembers the aftermath, the interviews, the forensics, the long hours that don't turn into neat endings. Cases like that leave open wounds for families and an ache for officers who are left with questions. Closing. 3 nights, 3 calls, 3 memories. A K9 that refused to cross a threshold, and a handler's uneasy conviction that his dog had read something his human senses could not. A telephonic warrant that led us down into a storm-lit basement where a man had been kept and taught to change the sound of his voice to survive. A cracked door and a trail of blood that ended with someone vanishing into the rain through a basement window. Each of these stories ends with a door left slightly ajar. A question that refuses simple answers. We do the job because someone has to. We show up when the phone rings, when the porch light is off, when a neighbor calls to say they heard something that doesn't fit. We take inventory of the world as we find it, the ordinary and the extraordinary wrapped together in the same morning newspaper. We collect evidence, we call for warrants, we press charges when we can, and sometimes we leave with rescued people and cuffs on someone who did the harm. Sometimes we leave with a file that grows and settles and never finds resolution. One of the through lines here is the thinness of the veil between normal and nightmare. Porches, hedges, familiar streets. These are where danger hides, because danger understands that camouflage better than thunderclaps and flashing lights. And then there are the other lines. Trust in the animal that stands by you. Trust in procedure to make sure you get the right legal authority on a rainy night. Trust that you'll be able to follow a scent that the rain wants to wash away. I don't offer explanations for the things we couldn't explain. We catalogue possible mundane reasons. Drafts can make dogs uneasy, technology can be misinterpreted, and rain can erase tracks faster than you can follow them. I do say this. I have seen enough odd things and heard enough voices and seen enough empty rooms that look like someone could be standing there to know that the job will always carry the memory of what we find. The unresolved ends of these stories, the dog that refused, the echo of the trained voice, the figure that ran into the rain, are the parts that linger because they remind us that not every night closes neatly. If one of these stories touched you, if you felt the same chill that I felt when describing a hallway light catching on an empty bed, or the sorrow at a man forced into a voice not his own, or the frustration of a suspect vanishing into a storm, share it below. Tell us if you've heard a night shift tale that left you unsettled. Subscribe if you want more of these first-person accounts. We keep telling them because the work matters, and because the stories we live through are how we remember what to watch for the next time the radio hisses and the rain starts to fall.